The grand hall was filled with the soft hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter. The annual charity gala was in full swing, and the atmosphere was one of elegance and high society. Guests were dressed in their finest, draped in designer gowns and sharp suits, all gathered for one purpose: to support a cause that was close to their hearts. It was one of the most anticipated events of the year, and tonight, the ballroom sparkled with light as chandeliers cast a warm glow over everything. In the center of the room, at the heart of it all, was the man of the hour, the billionaire who had organized the event. He moved gracefully through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, and offering polite smiles. His presence commanded attention, and it seemed that everyone wanted a piece of him. But even with all the attention he received, there was something, or rather someone, who was often overlooked in the bustle of the evening. At a small table near the edge of the room sat a young girl, who seemed strangely out of place amidst the wealth and glamour. She was dressed in a modest, simple dress, nothing like the expensive gowns most of the women were wearing. Her hair was tied back neatly, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. She wasn't just ignored. She was invisible to most of the people around her. The girl's name was never spoken aloud, but she was known to those who cared enough to ask. She was the billionaire's daughter, though few people would have guessed it. To many, she was simply the quiet one, the girl who didn't speak much and stayed in the background. Tonight was no different. While others mingled and danced, laughing and chatting, the girl remained by herself at the table. It wasn't that people were intentionally rude. Rather, it was something more uncomfortable. The fact was, the girl was deaf, and most people didn't know how to approach her. She was used to the silence around her, the silence that followed her every move. The few times someone had tried to speak with her, it always ended awkwardly. The words never quite seemed to reach her, and she was left alone again, watching the world from a distance. She had grown accustomed to it over the years, this quiet existence in a room full of noise. Her family loved her, of course, but the world outside seemed to misunderstand her. Her father, the billionaire, had always been supportive, making sure she had the best education and the finest things. But the truth was, he was often too busy with his empire to spend much time with her. He would come and go, and when he was present, his attention was often diverted by business calls or important meetings. The girl was not alone in her loneliness, however. There were other children in similar circumstances, children who lived their lives in the shadows of their parents' success. But unlike those children, she had always preferred the quiet. She wasn't bothered by the fact that no one spoke to her at the gala. What bothered her more was how they looked at her, how they seemed to pity her. She had grown used to being the subject of whispered conversations and sidelong glances. As she sat there, she looked around the room. The laughter, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all seemed so distant to her. She focused on the food in front of her, but even that didn't seem to hold her attention. She had learned to distract herself when the world around her became too overwhelming. She had a book in her bag, and she began to take it out, flipping through the pages. She lost herself in the words, finding comfort in the silence of her own thoughts. There were moments, though, when her mind would wander, and she would think about what it would be like if things were different. What if she could hear the music that everyone else was enjoying? What if she could join the conversations, laugh with the other guests, share in their excitement? She didn't wish to be like everyone else, but sometimes, just sometimes, she wished for a world where she didn't have to feel invisible. In the middle of her musings, something caught her attention. A group of guests walked by her table, laughing and talking loudly, not noticing her sitting there. But one person in the group did. The young woman in the back of the group slowed her steps as she noticed the girl sitting alone at the table. There was something about the girl's stillness that seemed to draw her in. She had been invited to the gala because of her work with the charity, but unlike many of the other guests, she wasn't part of the elite social circle. She had grown up in a much simpler life, and even though she now found herself among the wealthy, she still had a grounded perspective. She wasn't interested in the superficial conversations or the empty pleasantries that seemed to rule the room. What caught her attention was the girl sitting at the table, quietly observing everything around her. She noticed that people seemed to ignore her. No one had even acknowledged the girl's presence. It wasn't just that they hadn't spoken to her. They had barely glanced in her direction. It was as if she didn't exist. The woman couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the girl. There was something about the situation that felt wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Was it just the way things worked in the high society circles? Or was there something deeper at play? The woman took a deep breath and almost on impulse walked over to the girl's table. She had no plan in mind, no grand gesture to offer, but she couldn't stand seeing her sit there alone any longer. The girl looked up, startled at first, her eyes wide with uncertainty. The woman smiled warmly and sat down beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The girl didn't seem to know what to do, and the woman wasn't sure how to bridge the gap. She hesitated, then remembered something. She had taken a basic sign language class a few years ago. She wasn't fluent, but she knew a few phrases. "Hello," the woman signed, her hands moving hesitantly in the air. The girl blinked, her eyes widening with recognition. For a moment, it was as if a door had been opened between them. The woman smiled again and continued to sign, slowly. "How are you?" The girl's face lit up and she signed back a simple, "Good." For the first time that night, the girl seemed to relax. She signed back, introducing herself with a shy smile. The woman followed suit, introducing herself as well. They exchanged a few more basic signs, and slowly, the conversation began to flow, though it was simple and limited. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The girl wasn't just a silent observer anymore. She was speaking in her own way, and for the first time that evening, she wasn't invisible. The woman wasn't sure what had driven her to approach the girl. Maybe it was the sadness she saw in her eyes, or maybe it was the realization that she, too, had once been overlooked in a similar way. But in that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. The girl was no longer alone in the crowd, and the woman, though just a stranger, had become her first real connection that evening. As they continued to sign to each other, the woman couldn't help but notice that the noise around them seemed to quiet. The room filled with people just moments ago now felt distant. It was as though the two of them existed in their own little world, where communication didn't require spoken words, and the language of kindness and understanding spoke louder than anything else in the room. As the evening went on, the woman and the girl continued to share a quiet connection through sign language. The world around them seemed to disappear, and for a moment it was as if there was no gala, no crowd of important people in extravagant outfits. There was only the girl, and the woman who had taken the time to sit down and truly see her. The girl had begun to open up more, slowly but surely. She shared bits and pieces of her life, how she had grown up in the shadows of her father's wealth, how she felt more like a guest at her own family's events than a participant. She wasn't resentful of her father. She loved him deeply. But there was always this unspoken distance between them, a gap that seemed impossible to cross. She told the woman about her school days, how difficult it was to make friends when no one knew how to communicate with her. Even teachers often struggled to understand her needs, and while they tried their best, it wasn't enough. As the girl spoke, the woman couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and admiration. She had no idea how hard it must have been to grow up in such isolation, even in the midst of so much luxury, to have everything and yet feel as if no one truly saw you. It wasn't just the physical silence of being deaf that the girl struggled with. It was the emotional silence, the constant feeling of being an outsider. The woman's heart went out to her, but at the same time, she felt a sense of determination building inside her. She couldn't stand by and let this girl remain invisible in a world full of noise. She knew that if she could do anything to help, even just a little, it would be worth it. As they conversed, the woman began to notice something else. The more she signed, the more the girl seemed to come alive. Her eyes, which had initially been dull and tired, were now bright with something new. Hope. Hope that someone had finally taken the time to reach out, to understand her. It was as though the girl had been waiting for this moment her entire life. The woman could see it in her face. The relief of being seen, the joy of being heard, even if it was just through simple signs. It wasn't long before they were laughing together. The woman had learned a few more phrases in sign language during their conversation, and with each new sign, the girl's face lit up a little more. She pointed to herself and signed, "Happy." The woman smiled and signed back, "Me too." It was a small exchange, but it meant everything. The crowd around them began to shift. People who had previously walked past the girl without a second glance were now starting to take notice. At first, it was just one or two people who glanced in their direction. The woman noticed a few intrigued looks, but she didn't mind. She didn't care what they thought. She was there for the girl and nothing else mattered. But as time passed, something remarkable started to happen. Slowly, more and more people began to gather around their table. It wasn't intrusive, but there was a sense of curiosity in the air. The woman could feel it. People were starting to pay attention. Some of them had been watching from afar, unsure of how to approach the girl. They had noticed her sitting alone for most of the evening, but they didn't know what to say. It was awkward, they thought. But now, seeing the woman and the girl communicate with such ease, they were beginning to realize something important. The girl wasn't someone to be pitied or ignored. She wasn't someone to be avoided because of her deafness. She was just like them, with her own thoughts, feelings, and stories to share. The woman smiled as she saw a few people from the crowd move closer. One of them, a well-dressed man with glasses, approached the table cautiously. He had been watching them for a while, unsure of what was going on. He wasn't used to seeing sign language in such a social setting, and the whole situation was unfamiliar to him. But there was something about the way the woman and the girl seemed to connect that made him want to learn more. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice gentle. "I couldn't help but notice you two. Are you communicating in sign language?" The woman nodded and smiled. "Yes," she said, "we are. I'm learning, but she's been teaching me." She gestured toward the girl, who smiled shyly at the man. The man looked down at the girl, and for the first time he really looked at her. He saw her face, her eyes, her smile. He realized that she wasn't just the quiet girl sitting alone at the table. She was a person with thoughts and emotions, just like anyone else. His face softened, and he turned back to the woman. That's incredible," he said, clearly impressed. "I didn't realize how important this was. I never really thought about how hard it must be to be in a place like this and not be able to join in." The woman nodded, feeling a sense of connection with this stranger. "It's difficult, yes," she said. "But I think that's why I'm here tonight. To make sure she's seen. To make sure people understand that being deaf doesn't mean you're invisible." The man looked down at the girl again and smiled. "You're absolutely right," he said softly. "I think I've spent too much time in my own bubble, not really considering how others experience the world. It's easy to overlook things, especially when you're caught up in your own life." For a moment there was silence between them, and the woman could tell that the man was reflecting on what she had said. It wasn't just about sign language. It was about taking the time to truly see people, to understand them, to make sure no one was left out or forgotten. As the evening wore on, more and more people began to gather around the table. The girl, though shy at first, began to open up even more. She shared stories of her childhood, of the friends she had tried to make and the challenges she had faced. The woman translated for her, helping her share her words with the people around them. It was a simple thing, but it was powerful. The girl was no longer invisible. She was no longer the quiet one sitting in the corner. She was a part of the conversation, a part of the world around her. And as the conversation continued, the woman couldn't help but notice the change in the room. People who had been too busy to notice the girl now took the time to listen. They smiled at her, offered her words of encouragement, and even learned a few signs themselves. The atmosphere had shifted from one of discomfort and avoidance to one of connection and understanding. The girl was no longer alone in the crowd. She was part of something bigger. At that moment, the woman realized that this wasn't just about one conversation. It was about changing the way people saw each other. It was about breaking down the walls of ignorance and building bridges of empathy and understanding. And it all started with a simple gesture, a smile, a sign, a willingness to communicate. As the evening drew to a close, the woman felt a sense of accomplishment. She had done something meaningful, something that mattered. She had made a difference in the life of a girl who had spent so much of her time in the shadows. And for the first time, the girl wasn't invisible. She was seen, she was heard, and she was understood. The energy in the room shifted once again. As the woman and the girl continued their conversation, something unexpected started to unfold. The guests who had once been distant were now curious. They had seen the girl sitting alone for so long, but now, surrounded by others, she was no longer a quiet figure in the corner. She was part of the evening. She had a voice, and that voice was being heard, even if it was through simple signs and shared smiles. People who had previously ignored her now made an effort to interact, and the change was noticeable. It was as if a wall had come down and the girl was no longer invisible. There was a newfound sense of respect and empathy among the crowd, and the woman couldn't help but feel proud of the small yet significant change she had helped create. She looked over at the girl, who was smiling for the first time that night. There was a sparkle in her eyes, a lightness in her expression that hadn't been there before. She was finally being seen, not as a charity case or an object of pity, but as a person with her own story to tell. The woman could tell that this moment was important to her. It was a moment of belonging, of connection. The girl signed to the woman, her hands moving slowly, carefully. "Thank you," she said, and though the words were simple, they held so much meaning. It wasn't just gratitude for the conversation or for the attention. It was gratitude for being understood, for being treated like a human being, not a symbol of her disability. The woman smiled back, touched by the sincerity in the girl's eyes. She had always known that people often underestimated those with disabilities, assuming they couldn't contribute or couldn't participate in the world in the same way as others. But she had learned something valuable that night. The real barrier wasn't the deafness itself, it was the perception of those around her. It was the lack of effort, the reluctance to communicate, to reach out and connect. As the evening wore on, more guests gathered around the table. Some of them asked questions, some of them simply nodded in acknowledgement, and others, realizing they could learn a few signs themselves, started practicing with each other. The woman could sense the shift in the room. What had begun as a quiet, awkward moment was now transforming into a celebration of human connection. One guest, a woman dressed in a striking red gown, leaned in and smiled at the girl. "I've always wanted to learn sign language," she said. "Do you think you could teach me a few words?" Her voice was warm and her eyes were sincere. It wasn't the kind of pitying gesture that the girl was so used to. It was a genuine desire to connect. The girl's eyes brightened. She wasn't used to being asked to teach others. She had often been the one left out of the conversation, the one who had to adapt to the world around her. But here, in this moment, she was the one being asked for guidance. It was a powerful feeling, one that filled her with a sense of pride. "Yes," the girl signed slowly. "I can teach you." And so the night continued, with guests gathering around the table to learn a few basic signs. The girl who had once been relegated to the sidelines was now the center of attention, not because of her father's wealth or status, but because of her own voice, her own presence. She was no longer invisible. She was visible, real, and human. The woman watched all of this with a sense of wonder. She couldn't believe how quickly the atmosphere had changed. The girl was no longer the lonely figure at the table. She was the person everyone wanted to be around. She was the one who had brought people together in a way that no one could have predicted. But as the evening went on, the woman started to feel a subtle unease. Though the guests were learning and engaging with the girl, she couldn't shake the feeling that this change, as beautiful as it was, might not last. It was easy to connect in this controlled environment, in the warmth of a charity event where everyone was on their best behavior. But what would happen when the night ended? When the guests went back to their busy lives, would they remember the girl? Would they continue to make an effort to include her, to see her for who she truly was? The woman turned to the girl who was still surrounded by new friends. Her smile was radiant, but there was a sadness that lingered behind her eyes. The woman realized that, despite the progress they had made tonight, the girl's journey was far from over. She had taken the first steps toward being seen, toward being heard, but there was still so much more to be done. The world outside this ballroom wasn't always going to be as welcoming, as understanding. People had their own lives to lead, and their attention would shift as it always did. But the woman also knew that the girl had changed in a way that no one could take from her. She had experienced a moment of connection, of true communication, and that moment would stay with her, even when the noise of the world returned. As the night came to an end, the guests slowly began to filter out of the ballroom. The woman and the girl sat together for a while longer, talking in quiet signs. The girl was still smiling, but the woman could sense that her thoughts were elsewhere. The evening had been a turning point, but it was only the beginning. There was so much more to learn, so much more to discover. The woman knew that her role in this moment wasn't over. She had helped spark something important, but it was up to everyone in that room to continue what had begun. She couldn't make the world change by herself, but she could start a conversation, and maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all any of them could do. As they stood to leave, the woman turned to the girl and smiled. "You've made a difference tonight," she said softly. The girl nodded, her eyes shining. "No," she sighed. "We made a difference." The woman chuckled softly. "Yes," she agreed. "We did." And with that, they walked out of the ballroom together, the weight of the evening still lingering in the air. But it wasn't a weight of sadness. It was the weight of hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something bigger. Something lasting. Something that would change the way people saw each other, and change the way the world saw them. The days following the gala felt different. The woman couldn't shake the memory of the girl's smile, the way her face had lit up as people began to notice her. She had made a difference that night, but there was a lingering question in her mind. What would happen when the night ended? Would the girl's world change, or would she go back to being the invisible girl in the corner, forgotten and ignored? The woman had promised herself that she wouldn't just let the memory of the evening fade into nothing. She couldn't, not after seeing the girl's joy, the spark of hope in her eyes. She couldn't leave it there. It wasn't just about that one night. It was about ensuring that the girl didn't return to a life of silence, of being unnoticed. She deserved more than that. She deserved to be seen, to be heard every single day. So the woman decided to take action. She reached out to the organizers of the charity event, asking if there was a way she could stay involved. She had been inspired by the girl's story and wanted to help create a lasting change, not just for the girl but for everyone who struggled with similar challenges. The organizers were more than willing to include her in future events, and she became a regular participant in their efforts, always pushing for better inclusion and support for people with disabilities. But it wasn't just about the charity events. The woman also reached out to the girl's father. She had never spoken to him much during the gala. He had been busy after all, and his attention had always been divided between the guests and the cause. But after that night, she felt compelled to speak with him, to share her thoughts and concerns. One morning, she found herself sitting in the billionaire's office, her palms sweating as she prepared to speak. She had never been one to make waves, but she knew this was important. She needed to tell him how his daughter had felt that night, how she had felt for so long, alone, ignored, invisible. She needed to make him understand that it wasn't just about the money or the fame. It was about showing his daughter that she was valued, that she mattered. When the billionaire entered the room, she stood up to greet him. He was just as she had imagined, powerful, confident, and unapproachable. He shook her hand with a firm grip and gestured for her to sit down. She took a deep breath before speaking, unsure of how he would react to what she was about to say. "I wanted to talk to you about your daughter," she began carefully, looking him in the eye. "I know you love her, but I think you might not fully understand what she goes through." The billionaire's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Of course I understand. I provide for her. I make sure she has everything she needs." The woman nodded, but she couldn't let his words distract her. "It's not just about providing for her. It's about making her feel seen, making her feel like she's part of the world, not just your world." At the gala, she was ignored. She was sitting at that table all alone while everyone else was enjoying themselves. No one knew how to talk to her, and no one made an effort to try. The billionaire looked down, clearly uncomfortable. "I didn't know. I didn't see that." "That's the problem," the woman said gently. "People don't see her. They see her as different, as someone they don't know how to interact with. But she's just like everyone else. She wants to be seen, to be included, to have a voice." There was a long silence as the billionaire processed her words. He looked at the woman, his expression changing from confusion to realization. "I've been so focused on my work," he said quietly. "I didn't realize how much I was neglecting her. I didn't know how hard it must be for her." The woman nodded. "It's not about guilt. It's about understanding. Your daughter needs you in a way that maybe you haven't seen before. She needs you to help create a world where she's included, where people don't just ignore her because they don't know how to communicate with her." The billionaire leaned back in his chair, his face softening. "What do you think I should do?" he asked. "I think you should start by leading by example," the woman suggested. "Show people that it's okay to communicate with her, even if they don't know sign language. It's about the effort, not perfection, and you should help create spaces where people with disabilities feel welcome. It's not just about the money or the charity. It's about creating a culture of inclusion." The billionaire sat quietly for a moment, clearly lost in thought. Finally, he nodded. You're right. I've been blind to so much. I'll do better. I'll make sure she's included. I'll make sure she knows she's valued. The woman smiled. That's all she needs. For you to see her, for others to see her. The conversation with the billionaire had been difficult, but it had been important. And for the first time, she felt a sense of hope for the girl. Maybe, just maybe, things would start to change for her. It wasn't going to happen overnight, but the woman knew that the first step had been taken. The billionaire had seen his daughter in a new light, and that alone could make all the difference. In the weeks that followed, the woman kept in touch with the girl, visiting her and spending time together. They communicated through sign language, of course, but there were also moments when the woman would simply sit in silence with the girl, just being there for her. It was amazing how much could be said without words. The girl no longer seemed so lonely, so isolated. There was a quiet joy in her that hadn't been there before. She was beginning to feel like she belonged. The woman also continued her work with the charity, pushing for more inclusive events, more awareness, and more education about disabilities. She spoke at conferences, attended meetings, and worked tirelessly to ensure that the world would begin to see people with disabilities as people first, not as their disabilities. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, but she also knew that the girl deserved it. And if she could make even the smallest difference, it would be worth it. One day, several months later, the woman was invited back to another gala. This time the girl was there too, standing beside her father, who had clearly made an effort to include her in the evening's festivities. She wasn't sitting alone at a table in the corner. She was standing with the other guests, engaged in conversation, smiling and laughing. The woman watched from a distance, her heart swelling with pride. The girl had changed. But more importantly, the world around her had changed. People were reaching out to her, including her in conversations, and for the first time she felt like she was truly part of the world. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen, she was heard, and as the woman watched the girl, she knew that her work wasn't over. There was still so much to do, but for now she allowed herself to smile. She had made a difference, and that, she thought, was a good place to start. It had been nearly a year since that pivotal night at the charity gala, and the changes in the girl's life were undeniable. Her father had followed through on his promise to be more present for her. He had made an effort to include her in family events, and more importantly, he had worked tirelessly to ensure that she was given the same opportunities as anyone else. There were no more charity events where she was left sitting alone in a corner. No more silence in a room full of people. The girl had found her place in the world, and it was more than just about the visibility. It was about belonging. The woman had stayed in touch with both the girl and her father. She continued her work advocating for disability inclusion, her passion growing stronger with each success, no matter how small. She had become an advocate, a bridge between people with disabilities and the world that often overlooked them. But what made her most proud wasn't the speeches, the meetings, or the accolades. It was seeing the girl smile, the way her confidence had grown, and how she was now fully participating in her own life. One evening, the woman found herself sitting across from the girl at a small cafe, the soft hum of conversation around them. The girl was no longer the quiet, withdrawn figure she had been before. She had a new energy about her, an enthusiasm that was infectious. She was no longer afraid to speak up, to share her thoughts with the world. She was truly coming into her own. As they sat and chatted, the woman couldn't help but notice how different the girl looked. She had gained a sense of self-assurance, and it showed in the way she carried herself. There was no longer the hesitation, the uncertainty that had once marked her every move. She was proud of who she was, and the woman knew that it had taken time. Time, patience, and most importantly, love. The girl smiled at her, signing with ease. I feel like I'm finally part of the world. I'm not invisible anymore. The woman's heart swelled with pride. She had seen this transformation unfold, and it was one of the most rewarding experiences of her life. The girl had found her voice, and it was beautiful to witness. The woman signed back, "You've always been part of the world." It was just about helping others see that. They both laughed, the bond between them now stronger than ever. It was a simple truth. The girl had always been a part of the world. She had always deserved to be seen, to be heard, and to be included. It had just taken the right people to make that happen. As the conversation continued, the girl began to tell the woman about the changes in her own life. She had joined a group for deaf and hard of hearing individuals, where she had found a community of people who understood her experiences. It wasn't just about learning sign language. It was about connecting with others who shared her challenges and triumphs. She had made new friends, people who accepted her for who she was, and that sense of belonging had been life-changing. "It's not just about the language," the girl signed. "It's about understanding, about knowing that I'm not alone." The woman nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. She had seen the girl's isolation, had witnessed the loneliness that had once defined her world, and now seeing her so full of life, so full of hope, was a testament to the power of inclusion, of understanding, of simply being there for someone. The girl paused for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. "I used to think there was something wrong with me. I thought that maybe I wasn't good enough, that people didn't want to talk to me because I was different. But now I know it wasn't me. It was them. It was their fear, their ignorance." The woman nodded again. "People are afraid of what they don't understand. But that fear can be changed. It can be turned into empathy, into connection. And that's what you've done more than you realize." The girl smiled. "I never thought I could make a difference. But now I think I can." It was in that moment, sitting across from the girl in the cafe, that the woman realized just how far they had come. The journey they had taken together had been long, filled with challenges and moments of doubt. But it had also been filled with hope, determination, and a deep belief in the power of connection. As the evening drew to a close, the woman and the girl stood up to leave. They exchanged a heartfelt hug, the kind of hug that didn't need words. It was a hug of gratitude, of understanding, of all the moments that had led to this one. The woman knew that the girl's journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, moments when the world would try to make her feel small again. But the woman had no doubt that the girl was ready for whatever came next. She had found her place in the world, and nothing could take that away. As they walked out of the cafe, the woman looked at the girl, her heart full. The girl had grown, had blossomed into someone who no longer saw herself as different, but as an equal. She had learned to communicate in her own way, to embrace her uniqueness, and to see her own worth. The woman couldn't help but think back to that first night, the night when the girl had sat alone at the charity gala, invisible to everyone around her. She had come so far since then, and the woman was proud to have been part of that journey. She had helped open the door for the girl, but it was the girl who had walked through it, who had made her way into the world with confidence and grace. And that was something no one could ever take away. The woman watched as the girl walked beside her, her head held high, her smile wide. She knew that from this moment forward, the girl would continue to change the world, one person at a time. She had already started with her father, with the guests at the gala, and now with the community she had found. And in a way, the woman knew that this was just the beginning. The girl's voice, her story, would continue to inspire others for years to come. She had proven that no matter what obstacles we face, no matter what silence surrounds us, we all have the power to be heard, to be seen, and to make a difference. As they walked into the evening, side by side, the woman felt a deep sense of contentment. She had helped one person find her voice, and in doing so, she had found her own. And together, they had created something that was bigger than either of them, something that would continue to ripple outward, touching lives in ways they would never fully understand. And that was the beauty of it. Because sometimes all it takes to change the world is a single act of kindness, a willingness to reach out, and the courage to see someone for who they truly are. Months had passed, and the girl's transformation had been remarkable. She was no longer the shy, withdrawn young woman she once was. Her confidence had blossomed, and she was now a vibrant part of her community. People no longer saw her as someone to be avoided or pitied. They saw her as an individual with thoughts, dreams, and talents just like everyone else. It was a change that had come slowly but surely, and it was all thanks to the understanding and effort of those around her. But despite the progress, there was still something missing. As the girl's life had improved in many ways, there were moments when she still felt the weight of being different. It wasn't something she let show on the outside, but deep down, she knew the world wasn't always kind to people who didn't fit the norm. The woman who had become a close friend and mentor to the girl knew this better than anyone. One afternoon, the woman and the girl sat together in a quiet park, the sound of birds chirping filling the air. The girl had been making great strides, but there were times when she felt the sting of exclusion, especially when it came to relationships. She had started dating a few people, but the communication barriers, even with someone who was patient, always made her feel like she was one step behind. She often found herself retreating back into the safety of solitude, unsure if she could ever truly connect with others in the same way that others could. The woman noticed the girl's unease as they sat on the park bench. Her smile wasn't as bright as it usually was, and her eyes were distant, lost in thought. She gently reached out, resting her hand on the girl's. "What's on your mind?" The girl looked up, her expression soft but filled with unspoken worries. She hesitated before signing. "I don't know if I can ever be normal, like everyone else. People say they understand, but it's not the same. It's like there's always something between me and them." The woman understood. It was the feeling that many people with disabilities experienced, the invisible barrier between them and the rest of the world. It was easy for others to say they understood, but the truth was they couldn't truly understand unless they had lived it, and the girl, despite all her progress, still felt that divide. "I get it," the woman signed back. "But just because you're different doesn't mean you're less. You have so much to offer, and the right people will see that. You don't need to change to fit into someone else's idea of what's normal." The girl nodded slowly, but her expression didn't quite match her nod. "It's hard. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever find someone who truly sees me, who understands what I go through." The woman thought for a moment before replying. "It's not about finding someone who understands everything about you. It's about finding someone who's willing to learn, who's patient enough to walk with you through the challenges. And the most important thing is to never lose sight of who you are. People who truly care will see you for you, not just for your deafness." The girl smiled, a small, hopeful smile. She appreciated the woman's words, but she still felt the uncertainty linger in her heart. "I don't know," she signed quietly. "Maybe I'm just meant to be alone." The woman squeezed her hand gently. "You're not alone. You've got me, and you've got a whole community of people who care about you. And one day you'll meet someone who sees you just as you are, and you'll see that it's worth the wait." The girl looked up at her, and for the first time in a long while she felt a spark of hope. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but the woman's words gave her the strength to keep going. She didn't have to have everything figured out right now. She could take it one step at a time. Over the next few weeks, the girl found herself opening up more. She started to attend more events, joined new groups, and even began taking dance classes to help her express herself more freely. While she still felt the weight of the world at times, she began to realize that it wasn't about being perfect or normal. It was about being herself and finding the strength to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult things seemed. One evening, after one of her dance classes, the girl walked into a local cafe where she often spent time reading or chatting with friends. To her surprise, she saw a man sitting at a table near the window, looking down at a book, lost in thought. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't quite place it. He looked up as she entered, and their eyes met. He smiled and nodded in her direction, and without thinking, she waved back, her hand raised slightly in greeting. It wasn't anything special, just a casual exchange. But something about the way he looked at her made her pause. There was no judgment in his eyes, no hesitation, just warmth, and that was enough to make her feel a little lighter. Over the next few weeks, they continued to see each other at the cafe. Sometimes she'd see him reading a book or typing on his laptop, and they would exchange casual hellos. It wasn't anything serious, just two people who happened to be in the same place at the same time. But for the girl, it felt like something was shifting. She didn't feel like he was seeing her as anything other than a person, and that made all the difference. There was no pity in his gaze, no awkwardness. He was simply interested in getting to know her. One afternoon, as she sat down at her usual spot in the cafe, the man approached her table. He smiled as he sat down across from her. "I've seen you here a few times," he said, his voice warm. "You always seem so focused when you're reading. I wanted to know what book you're reading today." The girl smiled back, feeling her heart skip a beat. She hadn't expected him to speak to her so openly, but there was something so genuine about him that made her feel at ease. She signed slowly, explaining the book she was reading, and to her surprise, he understood. He had learned a little sign language, enough to communicate in simple phrases, and the girl found herself impressed. He wasn't just willing to learn. He was actively trying to understand her world. "I've been wanting to learn more," he said. "I think it's important to connect with people, and not just through words. I don't want to miss out on any part of the conversation." The girl couldn't help but smile. There was something about his sincerity that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. For once, she wasn't being defined by her deafness. She was being defined by her interests, her personality, and her ability to connect with others. As the weeks passed, they continued to spend more time together. They talked about books, life, dreams, and everything in between. The girl found herself laughing more, feeling more at ease in his presence. He didn't try to fix her or make her feel like she was broken. He simply accepted her for who she was. It wasn't long before they started dating. And though the girl still had her moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if she was truly worthy of love, she had learned one important lesson. She didn't have to change for anyone. She was enough just as she was. And the man she had met at the cafe saw that in her. He saw her not as someone different, but as someone just like everyone else, someone deserving of love and respect. As they stood together in the cafe one evening, hands intertwined, the girl couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had found her place in the world, not because she had tried to fit in, but because she had been true to herself. And as she looked at the man beside her, she knew that there were still many challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face them. She was no longer invisible. She was seen, heard, and loved, and that was all she had ever wanted.